Welcome to the Beyond Barriers podcast. If you're an ambitious woman who wants to advance in leadership, then this podcast is for you. This podcast is co-hosted by Nikki Barua, digital innovator, serial entrepreneur, author, and speaker, and Monica Marquez, senior corporate leader, ex-Googler, and diversity expert. From inspiring stories to cutting-edge strategies, you'll learn how to develop the skill set, mindset, and tool set to get future-ready fast and accelerate your success. Today, we are going to be answering one of the questions that one of our community asked in asking us, how do you get over the fear of speaking in front of people at a meeting or on stage or just be it in a kind of public setting? So we thought this is a great question to tackle because in your career, you're going to have to give presentations or speak to somebody more than one-on-one. So let's just dive right in. So Nikki, I know just from history that you used to have kind of a fear or stage fright of sorts. Yeah. And now look at you, you're live, you get in front of the microphone all the time, you do podcast interviews, you do keynote speeches and all kinds of presentations. How did you get over it? What did you do to get past that?
Experience a lot of pain. Well, I think my fear of speaking wasn't just about stage. Mm-hmm. It was just opening my mouth, period. I was just terrified of, just having social anxiety in general. I'm an introvert. I don't really socialize much. My favorite place is a library surrounded by books. I'd rather, be holed up in a little cubby reading a book than being around in big crowds of people. So even being in the workplace, being in an office and having to speak up in a meeting or stand up in a conference room and present something to a team, even that was actually pretty hard. And to go from there to then learning how to speak publicly, to being on stage, to being on bigger stages. It just was one of those things that I never even imagined someday being able to speak to thousands of people and being a paid public speaker, and actually developing that as a competency and and frankly, a career path as well. It's one of the many things I do. And at the time that I was at the bottom of that curve, I would have never imagined being on the other side and continuing to develop in that. Right. So it's hard to really even, if I put myself back 20 years and think like, would I have ever predicted that? The answer is hands down, no, there's no way I would have thought that. One of my most vivid memories of freezing up and on stage. It's actually when I was in high school. And I signed up for this speaking competition or something. And I'd never done that in front of the entire school.
So was that before you knew you had stage fright or
no,
after?
I don't think I'd quite discovered stage fright because I'd never been on stage before. Okay. But I'd seen other people do it and they seemed super confident. So I was like, oh, I can do that too. Right. Yeah. So I signed up for this thing. And any of my friends on Facebook that know me from school probably remember this episode where I went up, I signed up for this competition. I had no idea what to prepare for. So I had this scripted out speech and I memorized it. Right. So I just had the entire thing memorized. And I thought, okay, well, I know it. So I just have to go up on stage and basically repeat what I have, done by rote. And then I walk up to the stage, get up there, dead center of the stage. There is this tall mic, taller than me. And I look out and there's the entire school, like hundreds of kids out there, right? And I just froze. That was the first time I realized what stage fright actually feels like. And I just felt like the blood drain from my body. Oh no. And, my face flushed, sweaty palms, just complete panic attack in public in front of all the kids that and couldn't get a word out. I mean, I couldn't say a word. I couldn't remember a thing that I'd memorized so well before I stepped onto the stage. I mean, I went completely blank. And even when I tried to speak, it was like cotton mouth and I was stammering. And all I recall was the kids laughing, and I could just feel that spotlight. Wow, I'm on stage. I've literally just humiliated myself in front of the entire school on this annual day, this sort of big event. And
so what happened? Like,
well, I just froze. I mean, I couldn't even get off stage. It was that bad. I was just like stuck in a spot, and I couldn't get off stage. And I think that, you know, one of the teachers actually had to grab my arm and like pull me off stage because I just stood there frozen solid, not able to move at all. And it's so stuck in my memory of how horrifying that experience was. And that, frankly, in so many ways, held me back from, you know, being speaking up in public, because that's all I could recall is that's what I did. When I get in front of people, I freeze. I get a panic attack. So I just didn't want to do it. Well, that doesn't really help you in your career.
Right. So I was going to say, how did you get past that? Because that's a traumatic experience.
Yeah, it was a very traumatic experience.
And it obviously stopped you then from, you probably missed a lot of opportunities because you had that ruminating in your head. How did you get past that? What did you do when you said, finally, enough is enough? I've got to learn how to speak publicly.
Well, I don't think it was as stark and decisive as that. It was just finding myself in situations where I knew that I was taking a backseat simply because I couldn't find my voice. There were opportunities in meetings and at work where I had the right idea, or there's something that I could contribute and make a difference, but I couldn't get the words out. And I would just keep waiting for that right moment where I could say, hey, you know, like I want to speak up, and everybody else would speak up and the loud voices would take over. And I would just wait for that chance. And the chance never came and the meeting was over. And that happens so often. And eventually I just started to push myself to say, okay, my only goal is not necessarily to say something smart or get validation or, you know, engage in a dialogue. My only goal is to not leave the room without saying a word. That's it. Yeah. Even if that word is yes or no, it's okay. I just want to say one word and not, I set a very easy goal for myself.
Right. So you broke it down into little goals.
Instead of, you know, saying a lot or saying something super smart or thought through, I'm just going to keep it very simple. My goal is just don't walk out of the meeting without saying a word. And that gave me permission to simply do a little bit, say something. And, you know, from there, it just led to, okay, now I'm a little bit more comfortable opening up and saying something. And it evolved from there to finally getting the confidence to stand up in front of the team and speak at in the conference room and present to the team and get comfortable with a natural presentation style. But then I went through another stage where suddenly my successes sort of opened doors to get invited to speak. On stage. And that was
the next hurdle.
It's one thing to speak in safe spaces like your workplace or around your team or standing up in front of a group of people in a conference room, but it's something else to be on stage and speak to an audience that you're supposed to inspire. I mean, that was a whole different level. And at that point, that's when I realized that there was no turning back. You know, if what I dreamed of achieving and what my ambitions were, this was a necessary skill and a competency that I had to develop. I had to develop the competency of being effective in communication, being effective in influencing, being effective in speaking and writing. Those were necessary things that were part of the package of what I had to become. So I just committed to it.
Okay.
And the approach that I took was, first of all, dedicating time to it on my calendar every week. So it wasn't just, hey, I want to get better at speaking or I want to get better at writing. You can't get better at something if you don't invest time in it. And you can't invest time in it if you never schedule it.
Right.
So
Right.
The first step is just schedule something on your calendar. So I just made it as simple as every week I'm going to dedicate, at least 1 or 2 hours to developing my expertise.
Right. So it's kind of like a sport. So, you schedule practices, people practice the sport, they go to practice every day, and speaking is your sport. So.
Exactly. So just that, I just scheduled it. And then so then the question was, okay, I've scheduled a time. Now, how exactly am I going to get practice speaking? It doesn't work if I'm just speaking in front of the mirror. And so I started looking out for opportunities where I could just stand up and speak to strangers. It's like not a comfortable environment, right? So I have volunteered to speak anywhere and everywhere. If there were 2 people with a pulse, I was showing up to speak. I just go places to speak. I'd sign up for the smallest of things where I could just speak to total strangers and be able to connect with them.
What if you could pinpoint the invisible ceilings limiting your success? Imagine having clarity on your strengths and barriers so you can take action and gain unstoppable momentum to advance as a future-ready leader. Well, that's exactly what the Beyond Barriers quiz will help you discover. You'll get your personalized score based on the 25 essential elements proven to accelerate success in the digital age, so you can understand what's holding you back and where to focus your efforts. The Beyond Barriers quiz is completely free and takes just a few minutes. Go to iambeyondbarriers.com/quiz and take the quiz today.
Did you ever try anything like Toastmasters?
I did. I actually did Toastmasters a couple of times. I found it extremely helpful because, again, it gives you a systematic way to develop your skill. But nothing beats more practice, more experience, and just jumping into the deep end. So Toastmasters is great for developing the skill and the competency.
Right.
But beyond that, you can do the practice at Toastmasters, but if you just never show up to speak somewhere, it's not really going to help you get better at it. So yes, I did the formal training. I got, public speaking training. I got some writing training. I did all of those things, but at the end, I still needed to show up. And so I just signed up for everything possible, whether it was a meetup, whether it was a small group, it was even signing up to volunteer at universities and saying, hey, I'll go teach I'll do an evening class because it's a class full of strangers that I don't know and I have to speak to them. So I signed up for all kinds of things and I just did that. I committed to doing about, 35, I think, that first year. And so I just signed up for a lot.
That's significant because it's 52 weeks in a year. So you
I just signed up for a lot. Even if it was over the weekends, I just committed to that practice of systematically doing that. And then from there, my goal was to get comfortable around bigger and bigger sizes. So I focused less on what is the result, because that would have put too much of a high bar that I would worry about failing. So the first thing was, I just want to not pass out and not have a panic attack. So even if there's 3 strangers in a room, I'll sign up for that. Then it was, okay, how do I now get comfortable with maybe 10, 20, 50, 100 and get better at that? So I actually ended up traveling around the world quite a bit, getting to bigger and bigger audiences and different kinds of venues and different types. It's different when you speak in an auditorium versus, let's say, a whole different kind of presentation setting. So just getting comfortable with that, sometimes with those big conference lights where you can't even see the audience because the spotlights.
I find that helpful when I'm on stage and it's a huge audience. I'll blind myself. I just look at the lights and then I can't really see the crowd. And then it is
actually pretty helpful in something that big when you're speaking to, let's say, 20,000 people. You can't see anyone but the first row. You're completely blinded by the light and you're really just speaking to the first row for the most part. So in some ways it's less intimidating until you realize there's 20,000 people watching what you're doing. So that was a way that, it was just relentless practice. It was investing time. It was just setting goals that I knew I could hit. So whether it was don't walk out of the conference room without saying a word, to don't pass out with 3 strangers, and then evolving from them to bigger goals and bigger settings. And then past that was then it was the focus on crystallizing a message or focusing on how you connect with the audience, how you inspire them. All of that came later. The next stage for me after all of that was getting comfortable with speaking on camera, which is a whole different experience. It's one thing to be live with a real life audience. It's another to be on television or live stream. And
it's a different medium.
It's a completely different medium, and that takes a whole different kind of practice. But I think the principles are still the same. Just get clear on why that's important. So for me, the why was very clear, that it was part of what would help me develop into the leader and the kind of mission that I wanted to lead. That without having that skill and competency, I frankly would not be able to achieve that. So my why was very strong and very clear. Number two, once your why is clear, then figure out exactly what that looks like in terms of the end result that you want to get to. Be very clear. Is it becoming better as a speaker on stage? Is it better as a communicator through writing? Or is it being better on video? Figure out a specific outcome that you want. And then, block out the time that it takes, that you will need to dedicate every week, not just once in a month. Make it a habit. Block out the time and then figure out how you want to allocate that time. Start with small goals that are achievable. Make it impossible for you to fail that goal, and then just stick to it. And be patient, because the results take time. So be patient and kind to yourself. And eventually you're going to see that, and keep track of all of those things. I mean, I have evidence of what it was like back in the day. So it's always great to see that progression and to see your own evolution and feel good about celebrating your own successes.
Fantastic. So it comes down to really 3 P's, right? You need to prepare, you need to practice, and you need to be patient. And just keep doing it over and over and over, and just hone in on that craft, and you'll get there.
Thank you for listening to the Beyond Barriers podcast. There are thousands of podcasts out there, and we are so grateful that you've chosen to listen to ours. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a rating and tell a friend about it. And subscribe to get new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Visit IamBeyondBarriers.com, where you'll find show notes, links, and the best way to connect with our guests. See you next episode.